Today's panel discussion is focused on coaching and supervising your team, and we are really fortunate to have three trainers from our Teacher Leader Institute with us today, Dr. Monica Medina-Olds, Sarah Fleming, and Matt Hayden. And our fourth panelist is Scott Jackson, and he is a graduate of our Principals Training Center. And not only did Scott complete his Certificate of International School Leadership, he came back for more and earned his Advanced Certificate of School Leadership. I want to tell you just a little bit more about our panelists, and then we're going to get started. Dr. Monica Medina-Olds has been in a leadership role in an international school in, I think, almost every region of the world. She's currently back in the United States working as an instructor in the education department at Cal State University, Channel Islands. And she's also known throughout the world as an educational consultant on literacy coaching. We're so fortunate to have her with us today. We have Sarah Fleming, who is the elementary vice principal at the International School of Bangkok. We have Matt Hayden, who is the language development coordinator at the Columbus School in Medellin, Colombia. And Scott Jackson, who is the campus principal at the International School of Bern. Our panel is going to be discussing questions that were generated by people who were originally registered to take the Coaching and Supervising Their Team course in Miami with Matt and Sarah. As you're listening to the panel discussion, I would encourage you to send us questions using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. If our panel doesn't get to answer your questions live, we will be saving a transcript of those questions so we can get a response to you offline in the next couple of days. I also wanted to encourage you to use the chat feature as you are listening to our panelists discuss different strategies and ideas, because you may have had a similar experience and found some strategies or tools or resources that really supported you in your practice, and we would love to have you be sharing those out in the chat so that by the end of today, we can really have a whole collection of tools and resources and strategies to help you grow in your leadership practice. So with that, we are going to start our discussion. And we're going to start with a question that actually has come up, I think, every day this week. And so it's been really great to get different people's perspectives and ideas on this question. And that's around some advice for teacher leaders. So the question that was asked is, what advice do you have for someone who's moving into their first experience as being a teacher leader? And Monica, we were hoping you could start us off with your wealth of knowledge in leadership.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. So there are a couple of quick suggestions, and I know that other people on the panel will jump in as well. I think the first thing to do is to clarify your role with your administrator, to be sure that you know exactly what your locus of control is, you know exactly what your responsibilities are, and if your administrator can communicate that to the teachers, even better. So the message is clear that everyone understands and that you both are clear what your role is. Also, I would encourage you to hone in your teacher leadership skills that maybe you're a little less confident in. Often we find that teachers struggle with working with their team around the issue of accountability around common agreement. So you might hone some of those skills. But I would be remiss if I didn't say, continue to work on relationships. It's all about the relationships that you've built and your ability to communicate well with your team members.
Great, thanks, Monica. Mm-hmm. Do we have anyone else? Sarah? Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. I would add to anyone who's moving into a new teacher leader role, certainly to find some sort of mentor or thinking partner. Mm-hmm. It's so important to be able to continually reflect on what you're learning, the mistakes that you're making, the insights that you're having, somebody that's willing to, it could be anyone really, that's willing to just think alongside you. And if you can't find someone at your school, with Zoom, you can reach out to somebody that's at another school. I still regularly meet with a number of thinking partners well into my leadership career, and will continue to do so. I think it's so valuable.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Matt?
In addition to the relationship building, which is the most important, it was probably my greatest mistake the first time that I made that switch in one school from teacher leader to, or from teacher to teacher leader. I didn't invest in the relationships, and I learned that quickly the next time. But the second thing, and we speak about it in the course, is developing some collaborative norms, but maybe not in the traditional sense of starting and having norms and then leaving them to the side. And so going through the process of building norms just to have norms, but actually making them alive, saying, this time when we work together, we're going to focus on this norm. Let's reflect on how we did with this norm and then move to developing a second one. Really making those norms come alive and being about how you're going to work together, not about starting the meeting on time, which is important, or having notes, a note taker, which is important, but really how you're going to collaborate together, how you're going to resolve conflict, and continually working and referencing those norms so that your team is coming together and growing as a team, not just following a checkbox of rules that you said we're going to do together.
Great, thanks, Matt. Scott.
Yeah, I think also be yourself, because no matter how much you try to be somebody else, eventually your real self will come to the fore. So just loosen and accept who you are, and it's that genuine side that really brings the team together and brings that sense of respect, mutual respect happening, especially in collaborative conversations. So never forget that.
Great, thanks, Scott. And sort of building off of this idea about advice for new teacher leaders, another question came in, which is, as a teacher leader, what do you suggest I do to set that positive collaborative tone during the first few weeks of the school year? And Scott, I was hoping you could give us some thinking around that.
Yeah, I think building on what Monica was saying about relationships, I believe very strongly that it doesn't matter what your physical building space looks like or how good your assessments or your achievements are in the school. If the quality of the relationships aren't there, forget it. It's not going to work. And that, I mean, let's face it, we're in an industry where relationships are at the key of everything we do, whether it's teacher to student, leader to teacher, whatever. So I think in those first few weeks, you need to be present and you need to be reliable. You need to be around. I think you also need to consider what's working well within your team. It's really important. If you can't identify that straight away, then look out for the things that are actually working well. Leaders aren't always in fault finding mode, and they shouldn't be. I think it's important to seek opinions of others. All sides of an issue need to be considered when you find a solution. Sometimes that takes time, so you have to pace yourself. And I think finally, the importance of delegating, because your team needs to see that change happening before they'll buy into it. So I think that's really important, that you can let go and delegate, because your team will experience that common element of change, and they'll be buying, and that will then move out into the culture of your school.
Great, thanks, Scott. I'm gonna just throw in a question, because I know people have also been asking this all week, and it relates to this. And that has to do with starting the school year in an online environment. So I'm popping this question on everybody in the moment, but I know that people are thinking that out there on this webinar. And so I'm just wondering if anybody has any tips, thinking about what Scott said, but then if you're bringing that to a virtual environment, what can teacher leaders do to help build those relationships, especially when there might be new team members to the school? Sarah.
Oh, it's okay. Monica can go first.
Okay, Monica, then Sarah.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to encourage people to really invest the time in building those relationships. And I know it's very difficult to do. And I know that especially at the start of the year, it's been just a couple of years since I was on site at the very start of the year as an administrator, but I remember it like it was yesterday. It's intense, but I think that I've never regretted the time that we spent to really get to know each other. And I know it's tough in a virtual setting, but there are lots of ideas online, lots of great resources that people can access for really meaningful ways, authentic ways for you to get to know each other, because just as Scott said, that's the foundation that you're going to be building on through the years. So take the time to do it. Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Thank you. I think the advice that I was going to give, or the thoughts I had, apply whether it's virtual or not. But I would say you really need to define, what does a high functioning team look like specifically? And if you're a virtual, then define it. What does it look like? What is collaboration? What does high functioning collaboration look like virtually? And define it as a group. I think it's really important to use your screen sharing so that all of that can be up and that you're building it as a team. In terms of having the relationship building time, breakout rooms are amazing. I don't know if all of the different tools allow you to do that, but Zoom is amazing for that. And it brings a lot of energy into the rooms, especially if you can do a lot of quick different groupings. If you're a large team, that can really help. Also, I think sharing making sure that people have an opportunity to share their strengths and also their vulnerabilities around what might be hard for them. So if you're thinking virtually, allow people to say, like, here's something that really works for me virtually and I like, and here's something that you need to know about me. This I find really hard, or I always forget to unmute, or I take up too much airtime. Whatever it is, it's important that people feel comfortable to share those vulnerabilities, whether you're building a team, in person or online.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Matt?
I think one of the things we've recently had success, and this is going to be, it's unprecedented, right? We are actually going to be training our new faculty and building a relationship with 12 new faculty who won't even be in the country. They won't be allowed to enter until our 6th week of school. So one of the things that we've found that has started to work well virtually is the power of a one-on-one connection, whether it's a phone call or a Zoom, but 5 minutes in a one-on-one is going to get you more capital than an hour team meeting through Zoom or Skype. So it's about, I think it might be less efficient, but prioritizing that time and saying, if I have an hour, maybe it's actually better for me to call my 6 team members individually than it is to have a whole team meeting in that hour. So taking that time to connect, because there are some aspects that they're just awkward. You're going to talk over each other. There's just things about Zoom and Skype and virtual that can't be replaced. And so sometimes, yeah, a phone call is actually a better way to build a relationship.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. Another question, and this is just a really important question when you are coaching and supervising, and it's something that I know I struggled with in the beginning and still continue to work on, and that's this idea of effective questions. And so the question that someone asked is, how do I use questioning effectively? And Matt, I was hoping you could start us off and share some thinking around that question.
Yeah, I think the best learning I did around questioning came from cognitive coaching. And what I really came to learn is the best way to ask questions is to listen and really to allow that time, particularly for the pause after. So we get into this habit of question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. And when really it should be question, pause, answer, pause. And what really shows good listening is not actually having a question in the bank ready to go. So if someone I'm speaking to, they finish and I immediately have a question, it's actually a sign that I haven't listened to what they've fully said. I've been planning what I want to ask them. So kind of embracing the comfort of a pause and saying, I'm going to stop. I'm going to listen to you authentically and try to remain present in what you're saying. And then I'm going to pause and make a question that's related to what you just said, as opposed to a scripted question. And particularly if you're beginning, it's really hard to feel there's this desire in every single, if you're looking at Elena Aguilar, if you're looking at Jim Knight, if you're looking at Diane Sweeney, if you're looking at cognitive coaching, they all have prompts and question guides and recommendations for the types of questions that you should ask. And when you should ask them. And those are great resources for when you start, but really the fine tuning is kind of having the idea of where you want the conversation to go at the beginning and being responsive with your questioning rather than using kind of these pre-programmed questions. So I think the most effective way to question is to actually listen and pause.
Great, thanks, Matt. Scott?
Yeah, just building on that as well. I think that the question that I find myself asking a lot, but I get a lot of answers out of it in terms of working with teams, is what makes you say that? And often you'll get the pause that comes afterwards, but the things that come out, and I do that with students as well. When you ask that question, you can reach in a little bit more into the mind of why that person is thinking what they're thinking. It's not judgmental. There's often a pause after you ask it, but it's a very powerful way of just finding out where that person is at in their learning and in their journey. It is a visible thinking skill, but it's a very powerful question to keep asking, and it demonstrates and models to your team that you are actively listening.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks, Scott. Sarah.
Yeah, thinking about also how you can use a question with a team, and really thinking about how powerful questions, they are hard to answer. They challenge assumptions and they open up, possibility thinking. I really believe that questions that are framed around improving student learning should be attached to every single agenda item that is happening at a team meeting. It's really important that this is a really big win you can have as a teacher leader, is to make sure that you're designing your agendas really thoughtfully around questions to improve student learning. How do we know students are learning? What makes us say that? Whatever the question is, it doesn't have to be a fancy, artful one, but it needs to be really powerful around impacting and how are we measuring and impacting learning. And also it helps to keep everyone focused. So a question takes away some of the emotion out of it all. If this is the question, it becomes almost like the third point, and it keeps us really focused and productive on improving learning, which is what we want our collaborative time to be all focused around.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I'm going to transition our conversation a little bit to another element that every teacher leader faces, and that's someone on their team who's a little bit resistant to the work that your team is doing. So the question is, what are some strategies I can use to help me deal with team members who are resistant to the work that we're doing?
Never happens.
Never happens. Sarah, I was hoping you could start us off with some strategies.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Gosh, we could just have a whole hour just on this, I think. I really believe that people walk in as much light as they have. And so when people are being resistant and difficult, often it has nothing to do with you, and maybe even nothing to do with what's going on at school. So, I think one strategy is to really make sure that you have a strong relationship with that person and that they've had a chance to be heard and acknowledged. You don't have to agree with everything that someone says in order to listen, but you can seek to understand. To be totally frank, we need the people asking the hard questions. We need those people. They strengthen our teams, they strengthen our schools, because they're really forcing us to clarify our beliefs and our values. And so often when there's a rub with you and with a teammate or with a team, it's so, I think often it's because the change or the initiative conflicts with deeply held values and beliefs, or that there is something going on around fear or insecurity with that change. So it's so important to not just focus on the surface, on the behavior, but to go deeper and really listen to what's below that and to figure out, what is this person really saying? What is this person really feeling? And why might they feel that way? And then paraphrase that emotion so that they, or acknowledge that emotion so that they feel heard, and that you can then hopefully move forward. I mean, there's so many other strategies involved in that, but I'll leave it there and pass it on to the other panelists.
Great. Monica.
Yeah, I really want to jump on this idea that Sarah mentioned, which is the fear. And so I think if you can take some time to really sift through the comments or the reactions that you're getting, it's typically those 5 areas of loss, of control, of status, of ego, of resources, and of job. And usually, not always, usually the reaction that you're getting comes from loss, fearing loss of control in one of those areas. So if you can drill down a little bit with the person and, just as Sarah said, be a good listener, reflect on what they're saying and key into what the fear is, then you can move forward and you can support the person in reassuring them about that fear.
Great, thanks, Monica. Scott?
Yeah, and just I know we're talking about resources a little bit soon, later on, but there is a really powerful book that helped me through my leadership experiences at the beginning. A lot of you have heard of it. It's Having Hard Conversations by Jennifer Abrams, and she's actually got really simple, practical scripts in there that can really support you at the beginning of your journey when you're having those difficult conversations. And what comes out of it is, as Monica said, releasing that fear. You can identify it, you can see it. It doesn't solve the problem, but it certainly structures how you think you may respond to those difficult situations that are inevitably going to come up.
Great. Matt?
I was just going to, and I realized I only have the ability to chat to all the panelists. One resource that I didn't share, but I was just thinking about as everyone was talking about, is the Noster change model, which really breaks down what Monica was saying in a nice visual. And when you look at particularly the idea of resistance, it comes down to this idea of incentives, but it's not incentives necessarily in the monetary sense. It's like the incentive of feeling successful. Do I have an opportunity to be successful in this initiative? And I think a lot of those fears come up when people don't think they're going to be successful. And that is often the root cause. Is everyone that we work with, everyone that's in education wants to be successful. And when you ask people to change and you ask them to leave their comfort zone, you're asking them to take a risk and leave something that they feel that they're successful in to try something else. And so it's, how do we support people? How do we incentivize people to take that risk?
Like Sarah said earlier, this conversation could go on and on for a long time and continue to be very engaging. So you just got a little glimpse of what the coaching and supervising course looks like for 5 days. But I am going to have to transition us now into sharing some resources, which is another exciting part of this session, because we know that people are always looking for really good resources to add to their toolbox. So I've asked each of the panelists if they would share some of their favorite resources, and they're going to give you a little overview of what those resources are. I am going to be sharing a link to all of these resources, and I'll also include the extra things that were just added in, like Noster's change model and the How to Have Hard Conversations book. So we'll make sure that you have a link to all of those resources. If you are joining us on Zoom, you'll receive an email after this session. If you're on Facebook Live, I'll be posting a link to the resources on the Facebook page, and then when this video goes up on YouTube, we will have a link to it in the video description. It's just going to take a few hours after we finish the session, but we'll make sure you get all of these resources. So let's see. Monica, can we start with you and have you tell us a little bit about the resources you wanted to share? You're mute. There you go.
Sorry. So there are lots of resources that we share with the International Literacy Coaching cohort, but the newest ones that we've been spending some time on are the Jim Knight books, the Impact Cycle, and specifically the Instructional Playbook. And the thing that I wanted to talk about, there are lots of great Jim Knight resources. I'd really encourage all of you to take some time and look through them and research them. But the element that I wanted to key in on today were checklists. And that what we're finding with coaches is that the checklist really helps them to keep their explanations of strategies organized and prevents them from overwhelming teachers. So a checklist really helps you to get to the essence of whatever the strategy is, whatever the process is that you're supporting that teacher in. And so I would really encourage you to take a look at those resources, particularly the Instructional Playbook, which helps you to create a group of checklists that you can reference and that your teachers can reference.
Great, thanks, Monica. Matt, could you tell us about some of the resources that you've selected?
Sure, and I just wanted to build off the kind of the source that Monica was referencing is Jim Knight based a lot of his work on checklists from Atul Gawande, who made a book that's called The Checklist Manifesto. And he's also a great piece he wrote for the New Yorker, and he has a TED talk about it also. This is not a resource I'm sharing, but it's about how everyone deserves a coach. And he's really kind of one of the advocates outside the education world that built up this current passion around instructional coaching and why everyone really deserves a coach. So he's a great resource. The resources that Kristen will be sharing that I have highlighted are, one is from cognitive coaching. It's called 5 Types of Feedback, or 5 Forms of Feedback. I can't remember which word they use in the title there, but it basically goes through the ways that teacher leaders can give feedback and makes a recommendation that kind of the most powerful pairing that you can give when giving feedback is using data with a mediative question. So saying, for example, I noticed you called on these 5 students and they talked for 2 minutes of the 45 minutes in your class. How might active discussion in your class be affected by this choice? So you're not putting any judgment or evaluation. You're really, as a supervisor who's also a part of the team, you're just presenting data and prompting teachers to reflect on those data, as opposed to giving some sort of evaluation. So that's a resource that's available. And then the second thing, and Monica talked about it very early, is the importance of defining your role. And in there is Joanne Killian came up with kind of a list of 10 roles that like a coach could play. And what's really important is that you talk with your administrator and say, you know, which of these roles do you want me to play? How do you envision this coaching or supervising role to work? Because I can't do all of them. And the coaches that get most frustrated are the ones that feel like they have to do a little bit of all of those roles. And it's really saying, well, you know, what are the 2 priorities of the school? What's the mission and vision of the school? And which of these coaching roles most align to our strategic goals or priorities? So those are 2 resources that I have posted.
Great, thanks, Matt. Scott, could you tell us a little bit about the resources you selected?
Sure. So I've posted a meeting norm that I would have, and we're all pretty much familiar with meeting norms. The reason why I like this one is because it also includes the notion of aiming for get-go. So sometimes in meetings, it's not about perfection, it's just getting the process going. As educators, we like to get perfection happening, but having the get-go, just moving it along in the right direction is really important. And that's also reassuring for the team that you're working with. Building on the asynchronous conversations, distance learning conversations we were having earlier, we all had that situation where we got the free 6-month subscription to whatever resources that were out there. It happened with all of us. But one that particularly struck me was the Parlay Ideas platform, which we used as a school to leverage some asynchronous conversations around definitions of learning and learning principles. It's a really good resource in terms of having meaningful, inclusive faculty discussions. They have all sorts of roundtable discussions already made on there that you can modify as well. You can anonymize people, or you can have them up front. And what it did with us was, I think, I say the mice roared. So we had those team members who you would quietly normally sit back and didn't monopolize meetings. This was a way for them to really engage in really good conversations. So Parlay, I think, is a very positive thing that we'll look at using again next year during distance learning. And the final one that's just come to my attention, it's from Simon Sinek, and he's just released another one of his YouTube clips, and it's about tribes. And he talks about how teams need to have a shared vision, and sometimes they also need to have a shared experience. And he uses that notion of the difference between optimism and positivity, and that optimism is authentic. So we're all working through some struggles with distance learning at the moment, but we're positive we're going to get there, as opposed to everything is good, don't worry, let's ignore the realities and let's keep moving through. And I would say for any new team leader that's out there, it's on YouTube. It's called Simon Sinek Talks About Tribes. And it's just inspirational and a good way to start your new academic year in that situation, because he just has some really good common sense tips there to re-energize you as a team leader.
Great, thank you, Scott. And Sarah, we'd love to hear about your resources.
Okay, so I shared an article by Killian as well that Matt referred to earlier. It's a very short article, but it's a really nice introduction into thinking around coaching heavy and coaching light. And we use it quite a lot in our course. It's actually a pre-reading. Highly recommend that you read it. I think it's 2 or 3 pages actually. And it just gives a really, coaching light is not bad or wrong in any way, but it just gives different frames for thinking about your coaching. There's so many different coaching models out there, and really in so many ways it doesn't actually matter what the model is, but it's around the ideas. So it's a nice article there. I also included a protocol for looking at student work. I believe as a teacher leader or a coach that one of the most powerful things you can be leading your teams through is bringing student work to the table. And you so often, it's hard to, you need a protocol in order to do it, in order to keep it structured. There's so many that are out there, but I included one that is pretty effective and efficient. And I think we use it a lot at ISB, and I hope that it will support your teams. And finally, we did some work this year at ISB to formalize the teacher leader job description. So previously we'd had different teacher leader job descriptions in elementary, middle, and high school. And this year we worked quite hard to create a really clear teacher leader job description, or at least we hope it's clear. We got feedback from our teacher leaders, and we're going to use it more formally this year. But I'm sharing that because, as Monica said, as the very, very beginning, it's so important to have role clarity. And this might be a tool that could help you or give you an idea for what a job description could look like. If you don't have a job description, you can write one or propose one. And it's really helpful to see some mentors. So that's there as well for you.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. So we have a big list of resources that we'll be able to add to your teacher leadership tool belt, especially with everything from today and the entire week. So this is really exciting. Thanks, everyone. As we're starting to come to a close for today, we have a tradition at the Teacher Leader Institutes and at our teacher training centers, and that's called the Nugget of Knowledge. During our summer institutes, we have morning meetings every day that we offer our courses, and those meetings always end with a nugget of knowledge that's given by one of our course participants. During our virtual Community Week events, we've been having the course trainers provide nuggets of knowledge for us. And our Coaching and Supervising course is taught by 2 trainers, Sarah and Matt. So we are lucky to have 2 nuggets of knowledge today. So Matt, I was hoping you could start us off with your nugget.
Sorry, and I'm gonna break protocol super fast, only because Sarah said something, and I don't think we can say it enough in the amount of time that we have, but it's about that importance of student work. And Sarah shared that the protocol, but I think there is a bit of awkwardness in the teacher leader role when you're supervising your colleagues, and the student work really just makes it not about you. And it makes it about student learning. And a lot of times teacher leaders find, I have to spend all this time planning this great PD session. Just as Sarah said, if you just put a piece of student work on the table and talk about what is the student doing well and what things can we work on to improve this student and what are some strategies we can use, using the power of your team around that piece of student work is transformative. And unfortunately, it's a practice that's missing a lot. And it saves everyone so much time, and it makes the conversation real. You're talking about your students. It's not about anything hypothetical. So if we could have time to make that be a takeaway, it's that student learning piece. And now for a nugget. I'm gonna set a timer to make sure that I obey the rules now that I just broke one. So my nugget of knowledge comes around a mistake that I made twice. And so one of the benefits of being in an international setting is you get to restart when you go from one school to the next. And I often reminded of that kind of, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And I made the same mistake twice. And finally, I'm not saying that I'm perfect at it, but this third time, and starting in my 3rd international school, I think I've made a better transition. And a mistake that I made both times in starting in international schools was trying to prove myself by noticing problems and coming up with solutions to fix them, instead of recognizing that we're kind of all standing on the shoulders of giants, and that we can, as a community, do more if we build on our assets than on our deficits. And I think Scott alluded to it earlier about that importance of really noticing what's going well. Because I came in and I said, this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working. And here's how I can fix it, or here's how we can work together. I thought, oh, I can be collaborative and say, here's how we can fix it together. But believe it or not, when you walk in and you point out problems, you don't make relationships. Particularly when you're going in places, most of our international schools, they have people who have invested a lot of time and a lot of energy to make things successful. And particularly dangerous is when you walk into a new context and you don't know the whole story. And there are some really good reasons for why some of those things that I saw were problems were actually good solutions for that context. And so I spent a lot of time recognizing that I had made this mistake over and over again, investigating before I came to the Columbus School in a new role that was new to the school, researching a process called appreciative inquiry. And the process basically begins with what's called a discover phase. So I spent the first 4 months of my time here at the Columbus School interviewing teachers, collecting data, only acknowledging the things that I saw were working well. So any observation I made was an assets-based observation. Any conversation that I had with teachers in focus groups or conversations with parents and students was about, what do you think's working well? And why do you think it's working well? What are the things that are strengths here at the school? And then after collecting those data and building those relationships and seeing the success, moved on to the next phase of appreciative inquiry, which is the dream stage, and thinking about, well, what could be? So we know what's working well. What are some of the assets that we have that we want to enhance and improve? And then we move into the design phase of the what should be. So just like we know with students, we have a zone of proximal development, and the same is true for school improvement, right? It's much easier for a school to improve building on the things that they're doing well than it is to start from something that they're not even considering or not even doing. So now we're finally in the last phase, and it'll be interesting as we start a year in distance learning of thinking about, well, what are we actually going to do? The deliver stage is the last bit of that appreciative inquiry process, and developing a 5-year plan. But that 5-year plan came from all of the assets that are available at the school. And I think when I look back at the relationships that I have now at this school, the sense of passion actually that I have for doing the work, also in recognizing that I'm working with teams on their strengths versus on their deficits, it's made a huge difference. And always going back to that, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, framing everything with, we're at this point to make this change because of all the amazing work that has come before it. And I think that assets based approach is my nugget for everyone today.
So important. Thank you for sharing that nugget with us, Matt. And Sarah, we would love to hear your nugget.
All right. So 5 or 6 years ago, ISB had a really strong and robust coaching model. We had 3 elementary learning coaches. That was their formal job. And then we had 3 others in the middle school and the high school. I was fortunate to be one of those for a period of time. We all had extensive training. We worked with Diane Sweeney learning about the student-centered coaching model. We had a coaching PLC. We led teachers and teams, and we were really reflecting on our impact on student learning. Then we went through some changes at our school, and we went from having 3 coaches in the elementary school to having 0 in 1 year. It was really, it was sad. It was hard. Our teachers really deeply valued coaching, and were so disappointed. And we also knew that our students deserved it. We really believed that coaching was one of the most powerful models for internal professional development, but we didn't have any. And one day, we were having this informal conversation, and someone said, won't it be great when we get to post a coaching job again, because we'll have so many internal applicants. We have so many strong leaders and aspiring coaches on our faculty. And it was this kind of light bulb moment when we realized, rather than dwelling on the fact that we didn't have any coaches positionally, so we didn't have any formal coaches, we needed to look at what we did have. And it's interesting, the connection to Matt, your appreciative inquiry piece, thinking not through a deficit model. So we decided to create a coaching PLC type of group, and we called it the cohort. We called it the coaching cohort. Anyone was welcome to join, whether they were trained in coaching or not. Some of them, some people were aspiring coaches or just were intrigued and wanted to learn more. We had, I think, 12 or 14 teacher leaders and aspiring coaches join in the elementary school. We met every second week for the full year. We studied coaching models. We created learning modules that the group actually led, and the things that we wanted to learn about. We worked with Diane Sweeney again. We practiced our planning and reflecting conversations. And then we regularly circled back to faculty to let them know what we were learning. And then finally, when our team felt ready, we actually presented a menu of options to our faculty, and people could sign up for a mini coaching cycle, or someone could come into a team meeting and facilitate a protocol for looking at student work, or just a planning conversation. So all of a sudden, these teacher leaders and coaches were not only coaching and leading on their teams, but they were also getting experience working with teachers across the school, across the elementary school, in different content areas. They were really getting training in how to be an instructional coach. And all of them were doing this by choice, after school, outside of school hours, the learning part, and they were doing it in addition to their job teaching. So our coaching cohort meetings, we would come together for a couple of hours, or I guess it was only an hour after school, and we would reflect on the impact we were having, thinking about what we were learning, and really thinking also about how we were being coach-like in our interactions. It was such a powerful experience. And when we were finally able to post a coaching position again, which we did a few years ago, we had a number of qualified, skillful coaching applicants applying for the role. And we had also increased the capacity of our teacher leaders, who continue to be at ISB and make an amazing impact on teams and on teachers across the school. As leaders, positionally, and also just as skillful group members, which is a really important role as well. You know, my nugget for you is this: everyone can be coach-like in their interactions, regardless of their position. Every single conversation that you have in the teacher's lounge or with your team is an opportunity to be more coach-like, to support people in moving forward and ultimately impact learning. And it also impacts the culture of your school. So perhaps you can't have a full coaching cohort, but really think about building that internal capacity and use the resources that you have. If you don't have a formal coach at your school, come together with some colleagues that want to learn, study, and then go off and try, and then come back together. Rather than thinking through a deficiency model, think about what could be, and always remember that every conversation that you have, even in the cafeteria or in the lounge, is an opportunity to make an impact.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's really inspiring. I think between both Matt and Sarah, thinking about this asset-based approach, looking at the strengths, what do you have to go from, thinking about how might we, what are the possibilities that exist, and also knowing that you don't have to have a title of leader in your role to be a leader. So those are all really important things to remember. At the beginning of this week, I told everyone that we believe the teacher leader role is critically important for improving teaching and learning in schools, because teacher leaders are the people who take responsibility for what matters most, and that's student learning. And I think that really shone through in the conversation with the panel today. We also really know that being a teacher leader is not an easy role. You're navigating these two worlds, and Bambi said that this morning when she was speaking. You're in the world of teaching, and you're in the world of leading. And we know that that's not easy. So we hope that we've been able to provide you with some inspiration and some concrete strategies, tools, and resources today and this week to help support you in your leadership practice. Tomorrow, I'm going to post a video on YouTube that will have highlights from the week, and I'll share a link to a Wakelet that has curated resources from the entire week from all of our panelists. We hope that we'll be able to see some of you in our future teacher leader institutes, or maybe in one of our online teacher leader courses. Wanted to give a big thank you to everyone for joining us, and a huge thank you to each of our panelists today. I'm really humbled by your thoughtfulness and your expertise, and I'm just so grateful that you were able to share your experiences with us. To everyone out there, go forth and learn. Have a well-deserved, restful, and rejuvenating vacation. And if you're looking for some more community events, we'd love to have you come back next week to our virtual community week for international school counselors. All right, bye everyone.